I had to develop a lot of tools for resilience when I was involved heavily in those sorts of investigations involving border corruption and crime on the border. I was the whistleblower in an office of other criminal investigators during a 3-year-long investigation that ended up sending our boss to federal prison. Fire can either consume you, it can either burn you to ash, or it can bring light and warmth to those around you. You just read a quick passage of it and realize this was intended for the most powerful man on earth to remind himself how to do his job well and be a good person. Wouldn't you have loved it if your leaders had been asking themselves that more often? I know I sure would have. Is this necessary? Is what I'm doing going to advance the mission, or is it going to make things more challenging?
Welcome to Respond to Resilience, along with my co-host, Dr. Stacy Raymond. I'm David Dashinger. In this episode, we'll be speaking with Kristofor Healey. He's a former Department of Homeland Security special agent, and we'll be talking about resilience, overcoming adversity, and Stoic philosophy, and a whole lot more. We invite you to like and subscribe, YouTube, Respond to Resilience, Facebook, Respond to Wellness Inc., and Responder TV. We're on LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and go to our website, respondertv.com, for past episodes, guest information. We'll be right back to speak with Kristofor after this.
In this family, more of us die by our own hands than by the hazards of the job.
In this family, up to a quarter of 911 telecommunicators have symptoms of post-traumatic stress.
In this family, our mental health and wellness are in crisis,
while responders are quietly suffering.
In this family, many struggle with job-related stress,
burnout, trauma, sleep disruptions, substance abuse,
and relationship problems.
In this family, we can help the helpers.
with vital information and resources,
resilient strategies,
and success stories of overcoming the obstacles.
In this family, no one is alone.
Welcome to Respond to Resilience with co-hosts retired Lieutenant David Dashinger, Dr. Stacy Raymond, and Bonnie Rimley, LCSW, EMTB.
We'd like to welcome Kristofor Healey. He's a former special agent who spent his career directing large-scale, multi-defendant fraud and public corruption investigations domestically and overseas, including leading the largest tele-fraud case in U.S. history. He's now a professional speaker with the Team Never Quit Speakers Bureau. He's also the author of 2 books, Indispensable, A Tactical Plan for the Modern Man, and In Valor, 365 Stoic Meditations for First Responders. And Chris is the host of the Stoic Responder podcast and newsletter. In his speeches, books, podcasts, and newsletter, Healey uses his experiences in law enforcement and long-distance endurance racing to teach Stoic lessons in leadership and overcoming adversity to audiences around the United States. Chris, a warm welcome to Respond to Resilience.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, Chris, I'd like to start out by asking you just to tell us a little about your career in DHS, and then if you could just elaborate on how that influenced your support of mental health of first responders.
Yeah, absolutely. I started out with DHS like a lot of folks in that post 9/11 era. I was not in any way, shape, or form intending to go into a law enforcement career, and then, in fact, I was an archaeologist before I got into law enforcement. And on 9/11, I was actually working in the field. I was working with one of my professors. I was a recent college graduate. I was planning on going back to graduate school to pursue eventually a PhD, go all the way and become my own version of Indiana Jones. And when 9/11 happened, we actually got a call, the company I was working for, a few days after the attack, we got a call from the FBI office in Boston. And they were actually requesting individuals who had archaeology backgrounds to come down to, they weren't even calling it Ground Zero at the time, but to come down and assist with the recovery efforts and to help go through looking for evidence. And that really is what turned my there was a lot that happened in those 48 hours after the attacks. We learned, I grew up in Portland, Maine. We learned that several of the individuals started their day on 9/11 in Portland, Maine. All of that stuff sort of bubbled to the surface. There were a lot of things that drew me towards being a part of the response to that. But it was really that moment, being asked to come down to Ground Zero. I didn't end up having to go. There was a boatload of volunteers at the time, as I'm sure as y'all remember, especially if you're in the tri-state area. There were so many people coming in to Ground Zero from that area that they didn't pull us in 8 hours away. But that really set me on that path to become a DHS employee. And I started applying for police jobs as soon as DHS opened. I applied for Border Patrol. I applied for Customs and Border Protection. I applied for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Really anything that had an immigration focus is where I wanted to be, because of the way that the individuals who attacked us had taken advantage of our immigration system. They had come in on visas, they had overstayed. I wanted to be a part of making sure that didn't happen again. And I got hired on with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They offered me a job 2,200 miles from home. They took me from Portland, Maine, and they sent me all the way down to deep South Texas. I ended up on the southwest border, spent the next 15 years of my life working for DHS, first with ICE for about 3 years, doing mostly immigration-related work involving fugitives, individuals who had crossed the border illegally, who had committed crimes in the United States, tracking down fugitives and removing them from the country. And then I went on to the internal affairs section of DHS, which is called the Office of Inspector General, and I did internal affairs investigations for the last about 12 and a half years of my career. And that led me into a lot of interesting places, and I had to develop a lot of tools for resilience when I was involved heavily in those sorts of investigations involving border corruption and crime on the border, and involving our own law enforcement officers.
Well, let's dig a little deeper into that, since you mentioned it, like in terms of the adversity and the things that came up in your roles there, doing internal investigations. What were the challenges you faced, and how did that help you develop the resilience?
Yeah, so for me, I worked in a very small office. The Office of Inspector General has about 200 agents, and they are responsible for all internal affairs involving the Department of Homeland Security. And so when you work in the Rio Grande Valley, that means Border Patrol, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Customs and Border Protection, U.S. Coast Guard, TSA, any DHS entity. If there's a disaster like we're having right now in Texas with a hurricane, and FEMA comes in and throws money around after that, all of the fraud related to that would fall on our desk. So we had an incredibly busy case docket, which is like any other job. You're going to be dealing with the stresses of the administrative side of the house, keeping the cases working and moving through things. But at the same time, we were working in a very rapid, tense, uncertain environment on the border in the middle of a civil war between the Gulf Cartel and the Zetas. And a lot of our employees were getting caught up in that. They were being used as pawns to move dope, to move aliens. So my responses were constantly related to officer-involved shootings, were constantly related to smuggling events, were constantly related to deaths in custody, rollovers, incidents involving smugglers, with a van full of people who died of heat exhaustion, things like that, that you were seeing and dealing with on a daily basis as the duty agent in such a high traffic area for border type crimes. And so I was called in to see just some of the most god-awful things you can imagine, as are just about any Border Patrol agent, any customs officer who's down there. You're going to see terrible things. You're going to see the worst of humanity, because these smugglers that are essentially cartel affiliates, they don't care at all about the human factor. They don't care about people, and people are a commodity to them. Right? They're moving them and they're getting paid to move them. And so the human toll that you see when you work in a place like that is incredibly grating. It's why, in my opinion, Customs and Border Protection has such a high suicide rate. In fact, they have one of the highest suicide rates in the nation among law enforcement agencies. And I think a lot of that is because what these guys are seeing and having to deal with on a daily basis. And I only saw and dealt with a fraction of it as an investigator. The frontline guys, day in, day out, they see the entire iceberg.
Because I don't care how much you love this job, at some point you're not doing this job forever.
If our families are so important to us, why is the divorce rate so high?
You have to stay vigilant. You have to stay aware. The problem is, when you get home or when you're out in public, you run the risk of not being able to turn that off.
You mentioned tools, resilience tools. Are there some that you can share with us that you developed after doing this job for as long as you did?
Yeah, for me, I really leaned into, a couple of things. And there's a deeper story here that I can get into a little bit. But in the midst of all of this, I dealt with an internal affairs issue in my own office where I ended up blowing the whistle on illegal activity in my office and sending my boss and a fellow agent to jail. So the kind of the cherry on top of all of the normal stresses of a first responder job was that I was the whistleblower in an office of other criminal investigators during a 3-year-long investigation that ended up sending our boss to federal prison. And so in the midst of that, that's what really tested more than anything my ability to endure and my ability to stay resilient, to walk into an office in that sort of tense situation every single day, not knowing when the other shoe was going to drop, not knowing, if there was going to be retaliation, what was going to happen to me, if this was going to cost me my career in the long run, was an added stressor. And so for me, I really leaned into fitness. A lot of people go in a different direction. A lot of people come home and to de-stress at the end of the day, they're opening up that bottle of bourbon or they're doing, something that's unhealthy. I went in the opposite direction by the grace of God. I started running and it started out with long walks. I would come home and after a stressful day, I would take my dog for a long walk on the golf course in the neighborhood we lived in, just to be alone with my thoughts and have that, what the Japanese call a forest bath, just take that nature, the sounds and sights of nature and allow it to eliminate some of those stresses. And from there I started running, and from there I started signing up for races. I did half marathons and then triathlon, and ultimately ended up doing Ironman triathlons for a number of years and ultra marathons as well. And I found that was an incredible way for me to just be mindful, be alone with my thoughts, to unplug and to go out on the road and put one foot in front of the other and listen to my body and hear my heartbeat and hear my breath and be in tune with my body was the best way for me to focus on resilience. The side effect of that as well was that it allowed me to have a well of experiences that I could take back into the job the next day, where I would feel stronger. I would feel like you endured a 20-mile run this weekend in 85-degree heat or whatever the case may be. You can get through today. And so it had that kind of cyclical effect for me.
So I wonder sometimes with first responders, the ones that choose to really push themselves physically, whether you go into bodybuilding, weightlifting, as you were, these marathons. I wonder if there's a parallel between having your mind and your morality and your emotional world stretched, and then you have to counterbalance that with challenging your body. What do you think about that?
I think, there's a wonderful quote by Marcus Aurelius where he talks about adversity as if it's a fire. It's the burning fire. And what we throw into that fire is kindling. So what we do on the job every single day is kindling for that fire. And the fire can either consume you, it can either burn you to ash, or it can bring light and warmth to those around you. And so I think it's how you use the kindling to fuel the fire. And so for me, I found that being physically fit, it gave me confidence on the job. I approached the job better because I knew that when I was doing internal affairs, every single person that I was investigating, potentially arresting, was trained, was armed, was somebody that knew the same techniques and tactics I did. So having that higher level of fitness gave me confidence to approach the job with a mindset that said, you're going to win, you're going to come out of this on top, versus I think not having that physical capability, that confidence would potentially make you a liability on the job. I viewed myself as an asset, and so from a position of attitude, from how I felt going into the job, absolutely having that physical capability, testing myself physically, made me more mentally prepared for the dangers of the job. Absolutely.
I think you touched on the Stoic there in your this last discussion. Let's go a little bit deeper into that. What tools did you find, and how did you find Stoic philosophy? How did you was that sort of an offshoot of your archaeology? And once you found it, what tools did you wind up using that helped you further in your career?
Yeah, I was always a history, I say buff, but really nerd. I was a history nerd, and you know, and so my undergraduate degree was anthropology. When I did go back to grad school, it was a history degree, and so I was always interested in Western history. I was always interested in the Greeks and the Romans and that sort of thing. I didn't focus on that as an archaeologist. I was focused on northern New England, and, you know, pre-Columbian stuff. But there's a thread that weaves through the Stoics all the way to the American Revolution. We just celebrated the 4th of July here, right? And you know, Jefferson, when he died, he had a copy of Seneca on his bedside table. You know, he read the Stoics. Cato, who was the late Roman Republic kind of face of Stoicism, was considered an idol to people like George Washington and John Adams and Sam Adams, and during their time, they were considered the American Cato, right? The people willing to stand up against a tyrant and do the right thing in the face of tyranny. So I was always interested in that stuff. I took a lot of history classes, obviously, in college, but I picked up Marcus Aurelius's Meditations for the first time in Philosophy 101, like a lot of people do, you know, sandwiched in between Marx and Plato and Foucault and all that other stuff. And I just loved it because, unlike some of those other philosophers that are more academic and more kind of beard stroking exercises and thought exercises, Marcus Aurelius is very practical. He's writing what Meditations is it's a journal that he is writing to himself as the most powerful man on earth, as the emperor of Rome 2,000 years ago. No one had more power than this guy. And he's writing a journal to himself, reminding himself how to be a good man, how to be a good leader, how to live honorably, how to do things in a way that brings that brings honor to Rome, to the Roman people. And I think that that's an incredible guide for any first responder to sit down and to read this, or to just read a quick passage of it and realize this wasn't intended for publication. This was intended for the most powerful man on earth to remind himself how to do his job well and be a good person. And so I drew tremendous strength of that throughout my career. When I was going through putting my boss in jail, there were times I just buried my face in that, because it's like, Marcus Aurelius tells us to do what is right. The rest doesn't matter. Do what is right. And what better words to teach to someone in a first responder career than put your head down, do what's right. You know.
Can you give us some other examples of how Marcus Aurelius's words of wisdom could help a first responder, that's struggling with the various things, like struggling with the public backlash, especially like with police. So just, go ahead.
Well, the whole purpose of the philosophy and what I love about it is it's such a great operating system for first responders, because it teaches us to focus on that which we control, and it breaks the world up into what you control and what you do not control. And the entire exercise is to live in accordance with certain virtues, with wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice, right? These are all virtues that are in the Christian faith. Thomas Aquinas talks about these same virtues. Seneca talks about them. Marcus Aurelius talks about them. They're really foundational core virtues that any first responder can identify with and recognize, that you should be virtuous in your conduct and how you approach your job. But more importantly, you should recognize that the world, it is full of things that we do not control. And so much of our anxiety, so much of our problems, so much of what weighs us down on the job is when we put our efforts and our focus on things that are outside of our control at the expense of things that are within our control. Our effort, our attitudes, our actions, our reactions, those things are wholly within our control. And so that's, to me, what the fundamental lesson that I took out of reading all these different philosophers is that if you focus on that which is within your control, the rest does not matter. You can have greater emotional control. You can gain greater resilience. You can fortify that inner citadel that they talk about in this philosophy, that strong inner self, by eliminating those things that are non-essential, that are outside of your control.
Well, sounds like it generates a sense of peace and tranquility, well-being, kind of that sense of, all is well in the realm that you can control. Like, you've made that choice, and it is a choice, right? We're always in choice about how we decide to approach or react or respond to something.
If you're living with stomach pain and struggling to lose weight, I can empathize because for the first half of my life, I did as well. But I found the science-based strategy that helped me lose and keep 80 pounds off, and it's what I have right here. My team and I created the Balance Box as a way for you to achieve balance, holistic health, and give back to others all at the same time. So that science-based strategy I mentioned, super simple. Balance the pH of your body for maximum nutrient absorption. Balance your gut-brain connection. Get good sleep every night and feel a sense of purpose. It is scientifically proven that when we feel a sense of purpose, we have less cortisol pumping through our veins, and it improves our mental wellness. So that's what the box does. What's inside? You get a bottle of our supplement ENSzyme. That's our plant-based digestive formula, a pH test kit that's good for 1,000 tests, REM sleep from our partner Healthy Cell, and the best part about this box is a portion of every fee goes to our growing mission, the Influencers of Kindness, which you are now a part of. You are helping us feed and clothe our homeless veterans and brothers and sisters. So check us out online at thebalancebox.lifestyle. You can try us risk-free. We will honor a full refund in 45 days if you're not happy. And join us at the lifestyle movement that's changing the world.
I wanted to just move this into the area of leadership because we love to talk about leadership. And is it viable to kind of apply Stoicism to law enforcement leaders?
Yeah, I think absolutely it is. In fact, I write a newsletter on LinkedIn that largely takes Stoic precepts from meditations and sends it out to probably about 20% of my readership is police leaders, captains, and chiefs. And so it sends it out to them on a weekly basis, and it gives leadership lessons. I pull directly from Marcus Aurelius, and I say, listen, the leader of the world at the time, the head of the Roman Empire, is applying these lessons. I think these might be effective for your department or for your agency.
Right.
Today's newsletter actually talked about, the importance of eliminating the non-essential, and I filtered it through. I put out a Marcus Aurelius quote, and I talked about how that quote can be applied to a modern police environment or any other first responder environment, how you can eliminate the non-essential, how government jobs tend to come with all this extraneous nonsense that creates all of these additional stressors, and that if we can ask ourselves at any given time, is this necessary? And what I am doing necessary, we can do less better. And that's what Marcus is telling himself in the book that day. He's saying, ask yourself at every moment of every day, is this necessary? What a great thing for a leader of a government organization to be asking themselves. Wouldn't you have loved it if your leaders had been asking themselves that more often? I know I sure would have. Is this necessary? And what I'm doing going to advance the mission, or is it going to make things more challenging?
Right.
And so my newsletter draws directly from that. I give those out to police leaders all the time and ask them to ask those critical questions of themselves.
But, a lot of leaders have to juggle, changes in legislation, and they have to check that box, right? So is there any advice, Stoic advice, where, they may have to engage in paperwork that they themselves are not that interested in, but they're following changes in legislation? And how do you manage that? How do you have a good attitude about that?
It's tough to have a good attitude about, and I come from an immigration background, and that's like a pendulum swinging every 4 years when we change administrations. It's we're gonna enforce it, we're not gonna enforce it, and back and forth. And I worked under 4 different presidents and saw it all the time. And yes, all that stuff does flow downhill, and you have a duty to the oath that you took to uphold, protect, and defend the Constitution. And if what's being asked of you is within the confines of your duties, obviously you have to do your duties. Where I found the most effective leaders were the people who created space for their people to do their jobs well by bearing the burden of those administrative tasks to the extent that they could, not letting that run downhill to the troops. So if you put yourself in a position of leadership, what Marcus Aurelius would say, and this is how he viewed himself, is that you are the first servant of the people. You are the servant of the state, right? You are you are not in charge. It is not important. Your actions matter more than your words, and your actions are to serve those you are leading. And so we talk a lot about servant leadership, and that's become more of a popular way to lead in recent years. It's still not terribly popular within the government. I still see a lot more hierarchical leadership in the government. But I think that attitude from Marcus Aurelius is really one of the first examples of servant leadership, considering yourself to be first among equals, and let me take on this burden so that you don't have to.
I'm going to do something a little different here and kind of throw you something that we don't typically do, but I think you'll have something great to respond to this question. Chris, if you could have dinner with any figure from U.S. history, who would it be? Why? And what would you talk about?
Oh gosh, well, I'm a Calvin Coolidge fan, and Calvin Coolidge was a bit of a Stoic himself, and so we know him as Silent Cal. He was president about 100 years ago in the Roaring '20s, but I love Calvin Coolidge because he walked every step of the leadership ladder, rung by rung, right? He started out, he was a lawyer. He started out running for city council, and then he ran for state senate, and then he became lieutenant governor of Massachusetts, then governor of Massachusetts, then vice president, then president. He just steadily progressed. And he has this great quote where he talks about how most of the problems of the world could be solved with 2 words: press on. In other words, he talks about tenacity. He talks about the idea of not stubbornness, not banging your head against the wall, but knowing where you want to go and walking steadily on that path and not allowing distractions to get in the way. There's a similar quote from Epictetus, one of the Stoic philosophers, where he talks about, we need to persevere and the importance of perseverance, and how eliminating distractions allows us to focus on the main thing, making the main thing the main thing. I would be fascinated to talk to a guy like Calvin Coolidge. One, because he didn't talk a lot, to try to get some words out of him, I think would be fun. He famously didn't want to attend state dinners or talk to people, so it'd be fun to have dinner with a guy like that and try to give him a couple bourbons. Overcome the awkwardness. But I love the attitude of a guy like that who, when he was told that Warren Harding, his predecessor, had died, he was at home. He was from Vermont originally. He was at home visiting his family in Vermont. And, he comes downstairs. There's assembled press there. They've knocked on the door at 2 a.m. His father is a notary public, and he gets sworn into the presidency in the front parlor of his father's house by lamplight by his father, a notary public. Wow. And then the press is expecting some big speech from him. They're expecting him to say something, and he's like, well, gotta get back to bed, got a big day tomorrow. But just like that was it. So a guy like that, to me, that's an ideal leader. It's a guy who didn't want to be in that position, who worked his way up to that position methodically, who was all about pressing on, all about doing the job that was in front of him and not taking on all the extraneous nonsense that came with it. I'd love to talk to that guy. So
a lot of similarities to Harry Truman, sounds like, because
yes,
Harry Truman also systematically worked his way up the ladder, and kind of was also like an accidental president. He didn't. It was not his. I don't think that was his choice of career path.
No, he was a haberdasher. He was a hat maker before he got into politics, believe it or not.
So I actually want to circle back to what you were talking about at the border, and the extreme suffering of humanity at the hands of the drug cartels. The inhumanity of that, and how I imagine there was a lot of moral injury. That's an aspect of post-traumatic stress, that we are looking more and more at, and it can be a precursor to suicide. And you had mentioned that the suicide rate for Border Patrol is pretty high. So what advice, do the Stoics give for someone, like a Border Patrol individual who has seen, the horrors of how humans can be just used as objects, because of the alleged importance of drug trafficking?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the philosophy is that it's born of chaotic times. And so, it came about in the Hellenistic period. So this is after the death of Alexander the Great, when the Greek Empire is starting to fall apart and the Roman Empire is ascendant. And so it's born out of a very chaotic time. And I think that philosophy lends itself well to people who are operating that fast, uncertain, and rapidly evolving environment, where they're seeing things on a daily basis, dealing with things on a daily basis, where the world feels very chaotic and uncertain. And it again comes back to that core purpose of the philosophy of focusing inwardly on that which you can control, and recognizing those bad emotions, recognizing when you're going to a dark place before you do, taking time for mindfulness, taking practices into account like journaling, getting those things out, getting those thoughts out onto the page. The Stoics were all huge advocates of journaling. That's why we have their words. That's why we have the words of Marcus Aurelius, of Seneca, of Epictetus, of Musonius Rufus, of some of the Stoics that have endured over 2,000 years later, is because they wrote down their thoughts. They got those things out. They were huge advocates of going for a walk. Seneca, he used to take an ice bath in the aqueduct to start every new year. So these concepts that have become en vogue recently, they're not new. These are similarly situated 2,000 years ago during a highly chaotic time. The fall of the Greek Empire, the fall of the Roman Republic, the rise of the Roman Empire. This is a philosophy built for the chaotic times that people on the border are enduring. And it teaches some of those same lessons.
Do you think that's why it's resurfacing? You have people like Ryan Holiday. He just put out a like an abbreviated version of meditations, Marcus Aurelius's meditations, to make it easier to read, because I guess the layout of it is very chopped up because he did not intend it as a book. It's not like it has like free flow chapters that build on each other.
Right.
So so I just see more and more about Stoicism. Do you think it's a reflection of our chaotic times?
Without a doubt, yeah. It tends to gain in popularity when chaos tends to rear its ugly head. And so, we're certainly living through a time, especially in the first responder community, where we're dealing with, an often adversarial press. We're often dealing with politicians who are blaming society's ills on the people enforcing the rules, not the people who made the rules. There's a lot of that going on, and all of that falls. It rolls downhill, and it ends up on the backs and the shoulders of the people who are being asked to hold the line. And I think that is exactly why this has gained a lot of popularity, especially in the military and first responder community. I hope it gains greater popularity because it really is about emotional control. It's about developing resilience. It's about identifying what you control. And I think whether it's a chaotic time or not, law enforcement is the vanguard of chaos. So, we're standing that line between order and chaos, even in the best of times. So I think it's transferable even to good times.
Calling all mental health professionals, join us for the Clinician Masterclass series, Working with First Responders, and empower your practice with expert insights and actionable strategies, brought to you by the Responder Resilience Podcast. This isn't your typical podcast. Dive deep with seasoned therapists who will share specific knowledge and tools to support firefighters, police, EMS, veterans, and 911 personnel. Mark your calendar to save the dates and get ready to transform your practice. July 17th, treating EMS and 911. July 24th, treating law enforcement. August 7th, treating first responder veterans. And August 21st, treating firefighters. Subscribe and stream anytime after the premiere on our channels, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Stay in the loop and sign up now at respondertv.com. Are there tools you can recommend for someone to use while they're on the job? In other words, in a shift, on a busy call day, dealing with, a active administrative day if they're someone in leadership? Are the things that you have like practical tools that people can use to kind of, incorporate the Stoic philosophy or Stoic tool techniques into their busy day?
Yeah, I love to journal. I love to write every single day. I love to get my thoughts out that way. I feel like that's a great way to center myself, to get things out of my head that I'm thinking about, to put things on the page that I need to remind myself of. One great thing that Seneca asked himself, and this goes back even further than the Stoics, but he asked himself every single day, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? What can I do better? He asked himself those three questions and journal on that. It's the simplest journal prompt. You essentially are giving yourself a daily report card of how you're doing. And I think a lot of our problems come from not checking in with ourselves, not having that mindfulness with ourselves, just kind of, allowing that darkness to settle in versus sitting down and putting on the page.
There's that, and there's lack of humility that I could have not acted perfectly today. And where are those points? I think that's what I see is like an epidemic, is a lack of humility. There's like a lot of defensiveness. There's F you, I'm not listening to you, the whole cancel culture attitude. Yeah. So that's a big piece of it too. I know that self-awareness, you need to take time and you need to introspect, but but what is that worth if you have no humility?
Yeah, humility, self-discipline, both of those things, recognizing and understanding your faults, and the idea of trying to put yourself in another's shoes is also another big part of Stoicism as well. It's Marcus talks about you're gonna see jerks every single day. You're gonna deal with people every single day, and his response to that is to not be like them. Right, is to recognize and understand that you don't know what's going on with that person or what they're dealing with. So don't react in kind. Don't react emotionally to that person. React in a way that is honoring the fact that they might be going through something you don't realize or understand. And that takes humility. That takes introspection. That takes looking in yourself and recognizing that you're not perfect either. And you're right. I think a lot of folks, when we put that uniform on, we put that badge on, we wrap ourselves in the flag, and we go out there and we do our job. We consider ourselves infallible because we are calming every scene. We are the final word. When we arrive, it is bringing order, and it can be difficult to maintain that humility. And I think that's where a lot of asking those questions of yourself every day, giving yourself those journal prompts, asking yourself, where can I do better? That lends itself well to that.
That's great. Yeah, I love that. Taking an inventory on a daily basis to check in. It's great stuff, Chris. And you've written a couple of books. Let's talk about those. One's Indispensable, A Tactical Plan for the Modern Man, and the other one is In Valor, 365 Stoic Meditations for First Responders. Talk about those. Tell us what's in them and why you wrote them.
Sure. Yeah, the first book is a little bit of kind of my personal story. It tells a little bit how I use in operations and tactical operations. We would always, whether it's a search warrant, arrest warrant, whatever else, we would always put together a tactical plan. We always had our assignments. We always knew what we were doing. We always had our contingencies. We always had everything laid out before we would go and execute an operation. And I applied some of those same principles to my personal life. It helped me overcome difficulties on the job, like we talked about. It helped me overcome doing long distance endurance races. It helped us we did 2 international adoptions. All of those things I found were easier to accomplish when I had strategic long-term goals laid out and understood the tactics that I needed to employ to get there. And so that book is really about how I applied sort of a fundamental aspect of the job to my personal life. And then the second book, the one that I just wrote, In Valor, is kind of similar to a Ryan Holiday Daily Stoic, but it's designed for first responders. It's written from the perspective of a first responder. And I take it a little bit further than he does. I actually write it. Each entry, I look at it as each month is a sub-virtue of one of the 4 virtues. And so each month focuses on, so July might be temperance, for instance. One might be honesty, et cetera, et cetera. And so every entry of that month, you'll flip open that book on July 8th or whatever it is. You'll read the quote at the top from one of the Stoics. It'll have a paragraph or 2 of integration that will allow you to maybe contextualize that in a modern context. Sometimes, something written 2,000 years ago you might not see how that applies to your life. So I try to create that contextualization, and then I leave the reader with a journal prompt so they can have that introspection, that question. It takes 4 or 5 minutes to read it and do the journal prompt. And if you do that every single day, you're checking in with yourself every single day. So I look at it as a tool that I wish I had throughout my career. I loved reading all these different volumes from Seneca and Epictetus and Zeno and whoever else. But not everybody's got time to do that. And so to have a single volume where I can take some of the best advice that I found from the Stoics and put it into a volume where someone can read a little bit every single day and just get a little bit of that mindset medicine every single day. I'm hopeful that people will pick it up and get something from it.
I hope so too. My concern is that, do you think that first responders are going to see journaling like a diary, and that it's, you're in middle school and you're talking about who thinks you're cute, and, are they going to see it as something juvenile? Or because, the great men of the history, they would journal, they would write down their, best thoughts. And so how do we get the first responder community to embrace journaling?
That is the tough stuff right there. And I am very conscious of the fact that when I talk about philosophy, some people's eyes start rolling into the back of their heads as
Like,
well.
here we go.
Right. And so it's trying to make it. And so I have on my social media, I share a lot of this on Instagram. I share it on LinkedIn. I share it on YouTube in different formats. I have a podcast, which is essentially a different version of my book. I get in there and I give an 8 to 10 minute long, daily, kind of just talk about a Stoic quote and how they can apply it to the job, and also leave them with a journal prompt. So I'm trying to approach it from a bunch of different places to try to catch people where they're at. They might not pick up a book off the shelf that says, "Oh, Stoic meditations. Oh yeah, I'm going to go and do that woo-woo stuff and meditate and journal." But they might tune into my podcast. They might listen to it and say, "Oh wow, okay, so this isn't like that. This is just giving me some operating advice." And I think the fact that, I try to present it from the perspective of, if you look at my social media, I'm out on the range, I'm out shooting, I'm out weightlifting. I'm not like, I'm not sitting there, in a Buddha position, like I'm not presenting myself as some woo-woo kind of like, philosophical guy. I'm presenting myself as a guy just like you in this community who likes the things that you do and found incredible resources and value in this philosophy. And I think you can as well. So I'm trying to bridge that gap by showing myself out there, applying these lessons in a way that I think is relatable to other cops.
I can't wait for the tipping point.
I know, right? It needs to happen. And I think where, you raised an interesting point. A lot of this, and I don't know, y'all's backgrounds in terms of academies you went to and things like that. But for me, going to a law enforcement academy, it was all about, we're learning about the Fourth Amendment. We're learning about arrest techniques. We're learning about how to, weapons manipulation, tactics, all the stuff you need to do to survive on the job. What isn't presented in the academy is any sort of discussion about the difficulties of the job, the mental toll that the job takes. All of that stuff is absent at the first phase, and it should begin there. Right.
Absolutely.
We shouldn't be. I love shows like this. I love all the different podcasts and all the different shows and all the different programs. We talked about Scott Medlin. We talked about John Kelly. Those are great guys who have programs, who are out there, who are talking to other people and helping other people by relaying experiences they had on the job. I want to see us begin that process far earlier so that we're not constantly reactive. I want to be proactive with how we approach things. And I think that's where these practices of journaling, these practices of meditation, these practices of mindfulness that the Stoics really emphasize, I think that can be very proactive to prevent us from getting to those dark places if we engage in them at an early point in our career. And so the stuff that is out there is awesome. I think that anything that we can do to supplement that, to help people before they even get to that point is great.
Oh, absolutely. How about pass out a journal to every new recruit?
Yeah.
And have a journal prompt. Have a prompt like during that day's whatever, and
absolutely.
Then they take a half an hour, and whoever wants to share whatever they wrote or whatever insight that they came to from the night before when they sat and journaled, that would be awesome. But
I agree completely. Yeah.
As we wrap up, Chris, we've talked about a lot of great stuff, and I thank you for sharing all that you're doing, and really appreciate all that you're doing to help our brothers and sisters out there. Share with us where people can find you, social media, your website, the books and podcast and newsletter.
Sure. My podcast is available just about anywhere you get your podcasts. It's available on YouTube. It's available on Substack. You can just look up the Stoic Responder, and you can find it on any podcast channel, on YouTube, on Substack. The Substack is free. You can go to Substack, put in the Stoic Responder, and you'll get the 4 episodes a week delivered directly to your email, and you will get a typically a newsletter once or 2 times a week delivered as well. That's going to give you some additional Stoic tips and pointers. I love that format because it allows it to go directly into your email inbox, and you can just be listening in your squad car or wherever. Those episodes are 8 to maybe 15 minutes long on the high end, so you should be able to listen to them to and from work. It just gives you just something to like sink your teeth into on a daily basis. I release those 4 times a week. You can find all of the links to all of that stuff at my website, kristoforhealey.com. You can find links to my books there, my other social media channels and all of that stuff. But if you look up Kristofor Healey, spelled the weird Swedish way, Kristofor with a K, you'll find all that.
Okay. Well, and I love the tip about using your drive time to listen, because rather than listening to something mindless, what better time than going to or coming back from work to use it to, really to improve yourself and, make your life better. So, Chris, it's been a pleasure. You're a dynamo and a wealth of information, and wish you continued success with all the great stuff you're doing.
Thanks so much for having me, y'all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Remember to like and subscribe: YouTube, Responder Resilience, Facebook, Responder Wellness Inc., and Responder TV. We're on LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and please check out our website, respondertv.com, for past episodes and guest information. Till the next time, stay safe, be kind to yourself. Take care.